Welcome to today's Explainer. We are about to unpack a true story that has literally echoed through history for over 2,000 years. It is a completely gripping narrative about absolute power, desperate rebellion, and the incredibly fragile nature of the Roman Republic. We're going to look at the exact events that culminated on the infamous Ides of March, the stunning fall of Julius Caesar. Okay, let's jump right into this, because to truly understand why the most famous assassination in human history happened, we have to rewind just a little bit and look at the utter chaos that paved the way for it.
He was born a slave, but nearly destroyed the most powerful empire in the world. Before Julius Caesar ever became the undisputed master of Rome, the Roman Republic was already shaking at its very foundations, and it wasn't some rival superpower that brought them to their knees. It was a single man named Spartacus. He was a gladiator, a man completely stripped of his freedom and forced to fight to the death just for the entertainment of the Roman public, but he absolutely refused to accept his fate, and his decision to fight back sparked a massive, bloody revolt that Rome quite simply never saw coming.
Think about this number for a second: 70. In 73 BC, Spartacus escaped his gladiatorial training camp in Capua. He didn't break out with a massive, highly trained army. He broke out with roughly 70 other gladiators. Using stolen kitchen knives and whatever makeshift weapons they could scavenge, they literally fought their way out the door. Now, for the political elite sitting comfortably in the Roman Senate, 70 runaway slaves probably seemed like a super minor policing issue. But man, were they dangerously wrong.
Within a matter of months, that tiny band of 70 men snowballed into an absolute nightmare for Rome. It grew into an incredibly disciplined army of nearly 70,000 escaped slaves. Spartacus proved to be this brilliant tactician, and he repeatedly humiliated and destroyed the Roman armies that were sent to crush him. For 2 grueling years, Rome struggled to stop him. There was genuine, palpable fear in the streets that this rebellion was going to march right into the capital city itself. The Republic was terrified, and as history shows us time and time again, terrified people start looking for strong men to protect them.
So, how does this directly connect to our main story? Well, in 71 BC, the Roman general Marcus Licinius Crassus finally cornered and brutally defeated Spartacus in battle. Spartacus died fighting, cementing his legacy as one of history's greatest symbols of resistance. But the damage to the Roman psyche, it was already done. This prolonged period of instability, fear, and brutal civil war created a political environment where the public craved order above absolutely everything else. They wanted heroes. They wanted strong, decisive generals to keep them safe. And this cultural shift perfectly set the stage for the meteoric rise of Julius Caesar, culminating in his absolute supreme power by 44 BC. And that brings us to the man himself, Julius Caesar. He was, without a doubt, one of the greatest military minds and political leaders in ancient Rome. He launched these massive, wildly successful military campaigns, most notably in Gaul, which we know today as modern-day France. His victories brought incredible, almost unfathomable wealth and glory back to Rome, making him exceptionally popular with both his fiercely loyal soldiers and the everyday Roman citizens. After eventually emerging victorious from a really bitter civil war against his own Roman rivals, Caesar basically stood alone at the very top of the political pyramid. By 44 BC, Caesar was appointed dictator for life. Now, to modern ears, dictator is a purely negative word, right? But Caesar actually used his absolute power to enact some sweeping, highly popular reforms. He completely overhauled and improved the calendar, actually giving us the basic blueprint for the 365-day calendar we still use today. He tackled the massive economic struggles of the poor by reducing debt, and he expanded Roman citizenship to people living out in the outer provinces. The everyday soldiers and citizens absolutely loved him for this. He was completely their champion. Which brings us to a really crucial question. If he was a brilliant general who brought stability, reduced debt, and was deeply loved by the common people, why was he assassinated? Well, the answer lies in the deep-seated political trauma of the Roman elite. The Roman senators absolutely despised the concept of a king. Centuries earlier, Rome had actually been ruled by monarchs, and the founders of the Republic had violently overthrown them to create a system where no single man could ever hold absolute power again. So to the Senate, Caesar's new title of dictator for life sounded a whole lot like king. And so a desperate, shadowy political plot began to take shape in the dark corners of Rome. The senators weren't looking at Caesar's popular reforms. They were looking at a man who had bypassed their authority entirely. They feared that Caesar had become far too powerful and that he fully intended to dismantle the Republic to rule as a tyrant. To these elites, they weren't plotting a murder, not at all. They believed they were plotting a strictly necessary political intervention to save the state.
The scale of this betrayal is truly staggering.
This wasn't a lone wolf or some small trio of disgruntled enemies. A massive group of about 60 Roman senators secretly aligned themselves in this conspiracy. These were highly educated, incredibly wealthy men, many of whom Caesar actually considered close friends or had previously pardoned, but they firmly believed that plunging daggers into Caesar's chest was literally the only mathematical way to restore the balance of the Roman Republic.
Every conspiracy needs its architects, and this one was led by two key figures, Marcus Junius Brutus and Caius Cassius Longinus. Cassius was really the driving force here, harboring a deep personal and political resentment towards Caesar. Brutus, on the other hand, was a really complex figure. He was a close, trusted friend of Caesar's, but he also claimed descent from the exact man who had originally overthrown Rome's king centuries ago. The conspirators knew they desperately needed Brutus's prestigious family name to give their violent plot an air of legitimacy and honor.
All of this tension culminated on a day we now know as the Ides of March, March 15, 44 BC. Caesar was scheduled to attend a Senate meeting. Ironically, because the official Senate house was being rebuilt at the time, they met at the Theater of Pompey, a complex actually built by Caesar's defeated rival. As Caesar sat in his golden chair, the conspirators crowded around him under the guise of presenting a petition. The atmosphere must have been thick with adrenaline. When Caesar waved the petition away, a senator grabbed his toga, violently pulling it down from his neck, and that was the signal.
The attack that followed was frenzied and just totally brutal. Ancient sources, like the historian Suetonius, record that the conspirators swarmed him, striking wildly with their daggers, inflicting a staggering 23 stab wounds. Interestingly, only one of those wounds was deemed strictly fatal. It was a chaotic, bloody mess as 60 desperate men tried to physically partake in the murder of the most powerful man in the world, literally stumbling over one another just to land a blow.
Now, a powerful cultural myth surrounds his actual death. We all know the famous phrase, et tu Bruto, or you too Brutus, immortalized by William Shakespeare. The idea is that as Caesar saw his close friend Brutus stepping forward with a dagger, the betrayal was finally complete. However, it's really important to note that historians heavily debate what, if anything, Caesar actually said in his final moments. Some ancient accounts say he just silently pulled his toga over his head and died. Others suggest he spoke to Brutus in Greek, saying, "You too, my child." But honestly, whether he spoke the exact words or not, the phrase perfectly captures the absolute heartbreak of that moment.
Okay, so here is where the story takes a massive, incredibly ironic turn. The assassins stood over Caesar's bleeding body, completely convinced they were the ultimate saviors of Rome. They marched out into the streets, holding their bloody daggers high, fully expecting to be met with massive cheers and a restored republic. But they vastly miscalculated the situation. The republic didn't heal, it collapsed entirely.
The tragic flaw in their plan quickly became apparent. The assassins expected joyous celebration and a smooth return to the old ways. But the reality? Massive public outrage. They completely forgot that while the Senate feared Caesar, the common people loved him. To the everyday Roman, the elites hadn't saved the republic. They had brutally murdered the only man who was actively trying to help the lower classes. Instead of cheers, the conspirators were met with a terrifying, angry silence that very quickly boiled over into a full-blown riot.
Let's break down exactly how this backfired in 3 rapid steps. First, Caesar's loyal ally, Mark Antony, delivered this brilliant and emotionally charged funeral speech that fully turned public opinion violently against the conspirators, forcing Brutus and Cassius to literally flee the city. Second, Caesar's adopted heir, a young, incredibly ruthless man named Octavian, who would later become known as Augustus, teamed up with Antony to hunt down and utterly defeat Caesar's enemies in yet another civil war. And third, once the dust finally settled, Augustus didn't restore the Republic either. He centralized power even further, officially bringing the Roman Republic to an end and giving birth to the Roman Empire. Which leaves us with this final, truly provocative thought. Did the assassins doom the very republic they tried to save? Brutus and Cassius sacrificed their honor, their friend, and eventually their own lives just to stop one man from becoming a king. Yet their violent intervention didn't stop a dictatorship at all. It simply accelerated the timeline, practically guaranteeing that an emperor would take the throne. It's a profound historical lesson about the wild, unintended consequences of political violence. What do you think? Take a moment to reflect on that. Thanks so much for joining me on this deep dive into the Ides of March, and keep questioning history.